Okay. So welcome. We'll just go ahead and get started right on time. I will start off with a short introduction and then we'll get right to the roundtable. Let me introduce myself first. So my name is Emily Neumeier. I am an assistant professor at Temple University in the art history department. I teach Islamic art and architecture there. And today I'm here in the capacity of, I also serve as an associate editor at the International Journal of Islamic Architecture. In that capacity, today I'm hosting a webinar series that the journal has organized called IJIA Dialogues. And I'll say a little bit more broadly what that is. So the IJIA Dialogues is a new section of the journal that is basically an annual webinar that brings together scholars and practitioners from across varied disciplines for a discussion of critical contemporary issues that interrogate the boundaries between architecture, art, anthropology, archaeology, and history. So today, this is the second webinar in this series. The first one that took place last January 2021, was hosted by Hala Algi. It was about cultural preservation. And the proceedings of that webinar will be published this year in the next issue of IJIA, which is 11.1. So keep your eye out for that. And but let's talk about our session today. So this session is, the theme for this session is pedagogy, Islamic art and architecture in the classroom. So just in time for everyone's spring semester, no matter what part of the world you're in, we will be having a discussion about a number of pressing issues surrounding the teaching of Islamic art in a wide range of classroom settings. And we'll touch on the impact of the pandemic and the very frequent pivoting between online and in-person instruction. It's funny, when we first organized this, we kind of figured that we would have been fully back to in-person, but things are constantly shifting, as we all know. Many of us are back in the online environment. And we will also be talking about the demands for anti-racism and DEI initiatives within the field and intersections with decolonial studies. And we'll also be talking about what's on the horizon for new and ongoing pedagogical initiatives that hopefully all of you can learn more about and potentially use in your own teaching. So let me go ahead and introduce our speakers for the webinar today for our roundtable discussion. First up, Christiane Gruber is professor and chair of the History of Art Department at the University of Michigan. We then have Fernando Luis Martínez Nespral, who is professor of architectural history and a researcher at the American Art and Aesthetic Studies Institute. All of those things are based in the School of Architecture, Design, and Urbanism at the Universidad de Buenos Aires. And then finally, Stephennie Mulder is associate professor in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Texas at Austin. So welcome to our three panelists for today. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Emily. So nice to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for organizing this.
So yes, so welcome everyone. Before we get started, before we start talking, get into our discussion, a few bits of housekeeping. First of all, this session is being recorded, just for your information. It is both for myself to also present this in IJIA in a later issue, but also potentially this will be posted, the recording will be posted for the public later for those who cannot attend. This session will be about an hour long. We're going to really try to keep to that. And we'll start off for the first session, first part of this session with a roundtable discussion among the three speakers. And then we'll have in the final 10-15 minutes, we'll have set aside for questions from the audience. So go ahead during the panel discussion, please post your questions in the chat and I'll be monitoring that, and we'll get to some of your questions a little later on in this webinar. So that's the general outline for how things will go today. Let's just go ahead and get started. So I'll start us off with our panelists, just to get us speaking generally, some general trends in the field. What are some of the what would you say are some of the most important developments in the instruction of Islamic art and architecture right now, just in general?
Sure, I think I'm the first one to go ahead, right, in our lineup.
As you like. Yep.
Do you have my slide by any chance?
I do. Just let me go ahead and pull that up. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, so thanks for organizing this, and hello to everybody beaming in from all over the world. I see that in chat. There have been a few things that have been really revealing to me in terms of where the field stands. And of course, you can think through those ideas, but there's nothing quite like hard data or some visualized data to drive home some points. And so one thing that I've noticed in the productions, the presentations that have been submitted to GAHC is that oftentimes in our surveys of Islamic art, we teach more or less the canon, but we of course have been diversifying the canon and using new approaches, maybe thinking about thematic clusters and so on. But when we look at the presentations that have been submitted to GAHC, what I like to do is always put the flaws on full display, and you'll notice that right now, at least on GAHC, we have a massive gap for the Abbasids. We have no presentation for that 500-year period that's really part of the canon. And there's not much or anything really for the Seljuks, the Nasrids, the Ilkhanids. So that is in contradistinction to the typical parameters of the field. In the 60s, it was always sandwiched between late antique and early Christian and Byzantine art. So it was seen as a perennially medieval corpus of material. But now with new technologies, at least those who are submitting with new technologies and who are advocating for modern contemporary, we've noticed a kind of switch of the pendulum to what I'm calling the plentiful modern as opposed to the blank medieval. So that is an interesting, sort of wafting that I'm noticing, and we're going to have to find a way to move forward by not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And this is something that Gudrun Nishipolu talked about recently in her interview for the IJIA newsletter. So that's something I think we should have a discussion about going forward. The other issue that I've noticed, and here you can go to my next slide, Emily, is that beyond diversity, inclusion, and equity, we have, of course, anti-racism, which we'll talk about, but we have a big issue of accessibility. How do we make this material accessible, not just intellectually by foregoing jargon, but still having a nice foundational set of tools, including language. But we noticed through GAHC that essentially about 10% of whatever we're saying is lost on our hearers if AI is any indication. So I've pointed out some of the bloopers here. Bismillah can be heard as business law. Shah Abbas can be heard as Shah Abbas. And of course, Suleymaniye Mosque can be heard as the silly ammonia mosque. And we shouldn't underestimate the fact that our students, and I'm not talking about just hearing impaired or neurodiverse or students for whom English is not a native language, are going to be hearing things in your classroom that are not things that you're saying. And so what we've learned from the digital pivot here is that we shouldn't take for granted the orally delivered lecture as an autonomously understood product of pedagogy, because it's not. And so we have to find a way to crisscross between the PowerPoints and a script without overlaying the slides with text and are teaching from, let's say, the podium, because there are no closed captions wafting in the air when we're talking in the classroom. So those are some of the things that I've discovered, and I'll just stop there.
Thanks so much. And you know, I wonder, Stephennie, do you want to jump in here, because I know that you're also coming from a similar context of being in a large state university, and also thinking. I mean, Christiane just brought up you know, issues of anti-racism, and it seems especially relevant in our context, being in the United States. Oh.
Yes. Do you have my images, Emily?
Oh, Fernando, I was just inviting Stephennie to jump in on there. But do you mind holding that thought for just a minute?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
I can start explaining this.
Go ahead, Fernando. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
All right. Do you want me to pull up your slide?
Oh, sorry.
Do you want me to pull up your slides?
Ah, okay. No. Start with Stephennie. Ah, yes, this is mine. Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Well, Fernando, you are coming from a very different context from the United States, so maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
yes, I want to explain you this.
Yes, please.
Yes, this is a picture of my school. I came from Latin America, and in Latin America, the university system is very different, because almost all the universities are free for the students. Are state universities free for the students. So my university, it's the most important university in the country, has 300,000 students. And only the School of Architecture and Design, 25,000 students. Specifically in architecture, 12,000. And last year, we are now in summer, last year, I have 1,200 students.
Wow.
It's totally different. The building, it's a huge brutalist block, and the building is like a small city with 4 elevators. So we can't enter the building in 2020 and 2021, because it's impossible for the pandemic. It's a normal day in my school is like this picture. Many people walking everywhere, and only 4 elevators. So it's a big concentration of people, and these 1,200 students are in 10 different courses, but the media of a single course is 200. It's around 200. So there are huge courses, so it's very different. And the other situation is that the next image, please. The other situation is that we are far from the Islamic world. We are far geographically, but also far culturally. I have from those 1,200 students, many years I have no any Muslim, and we're really far. But my challenge is to explain to this student that the Islamic world is not so far. My main challenge is to explain that this is not so far. This balcony, it's from Lima. It's not from Cairo, it's from Lima. So, and the next slide. This ceiling is from Mexico, Tlaxcala, Mexico, and these tiles are from Buenos Aires. So my main challenge is to explain to people who think the Islamic world is far, it's an exotic topic, it's an unrelated topic with their daily reality, that is not so far, that they can find many connections every day in his daily life. This is my challenge. And the second one is how to teach to 1,000 people before the pandemic. Not only about pandemic, before the pandemic, how to teach to 1,000 people. This is the second challenge. So these both challenges are previous and independent to the pandemic. I have to deal with both challenges all my life in the university. I teach architectural histories, general courses of architectural history, survey courses, but also a course on Islamic architecture since late 80s, 30 years ago. So both challenges are for me this one, the massivity of the university and the imaginated distance from the Islamic world. I want to explain you first this.
Can I ask you specifically? So how is it that, you know, how do you go about explaining to your students this kind of these connections between South America, between your context in South America and the Islamic world, and do you see that connecting with efforts in decolonial studies to kind of create connections? Yes. Not just, you know, it's always you know, South and North, or, you know, connections to, you know, this kind of global North, right? Trying to kind of push back on that and create new connections. Would you say that's part of your efforts when you're teaching?
Yes, I think it's a deconstruction process, because I have to. We are prepared to think that the Islamic world is far, it's exotic, it's unrelated to us, and my effort is to deconstruct this idea on the students. So it's impossible to be far a culture whose language is the second source of Spanish language. We use every day, in every moment, Arabic words. For say Arabic words that adopted for in Spanish language, but is the work is to deconstruct the idea of an idea that is installed by the exoticism and Orientalism culture. I say every day these pictures are, I show in a first moment to my students pictures like this. Say, you think this came from Syria or from from Morocco, everywhere? But no, this is in your city. This is in near your house, and these tiles, I am from the Buenos Aires Metro. So 2 million people see those tiles every day. But we think this is something far, this is distant, and this is the main effort, to deconstruct this this idea, this artificial idea of distance, because we are educated to think we are part of the Western world, and we are not related with the Islamic world, or even with non-Western categories. Even something is not my topic, but something like this happened with native people, with native cultures. We think they are something far, not related, and it's the culture, the native culture of our country, of our land. And we are prepared to think that this is far, this is not related. This is the problem.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I wanna shift and ask Stephennie now. Do you have a similar experience of dealing with students who are far from the Islamic world in Texas?
I know Texas, it's like its own country, right? It thinks it is. Well, like Fernando and Christy, I also teach at a large state university. UT Austin alternates as one of the largest universities in the US. We have 50,000 students here. And that also means that at the undergraduate level, and even at the graduate level, it's rare that I have a small seminar style class. So, this semester, for example, I've got almost 80 students in my class, which is, I think, a pretty large class for an Islamic art type survey class. So the plus, nowhere near 1,000, of course.
Right.
I'm like, I can't even. I almost passed out when you said that. But I think it presents certain types of opportunities and certain types of challenges. I think, the plus side of this is that you can, of course, impact many more students all at once, right? But the downside is that we're not able to always go as deep as we might be able to in a small seminar style class. And, Texas has a certain advantage in the sense that it's such a large state. And, we always joke that Texas is the size of France. That is accurate, actually. And it's a Hispanic and Asian serving institution that has a very strong Middle Eastern studies program as well. Great collection of, Arabic, Persian, Turkish materials in our library. And has, in fact, a very significant Muslim student population as well. Texas has the 5th largest Muslim population per capita in the United States. So there's a substantial Muslim population here. And I very, very frequently have students with a Muslim background in my classes. So in that sense, I would just to kind of circle back to your big question initially, Emily, and some of the issues that Christy raised. I certainly see my work as contributing to broader anti-racism struggles in the humanities in the United States. And I think that, that's one broader trend that I see right now in the instruction of Islamic art and architecture among my colleagues. And I think that that's something that maybe we can explore a little bit more as we go along. I'm sorry about the giant beam of winter sunlight that's obliterating. I keep trying to move around and get out of it. There, it's a little better. So I think that one way that I've tried to approach this issue is by accidentally two things that I think have changed about my teaching in the last couple of years. One started before the pandemic, and the other has been, let's say, augmented by the pandemic or improved maybe, I think, in the end by the pandemic. The first is that I moved away. 2 years ago, I was asked to design and teach a course that had its home directly in Middle Eastern studies. I have a joint appointment in Middle Eastern studies and art history, but my classes had previously always originated in art history. So 2 years ago, I was asked to design and teach a course that originated in Middle Eastern studies. And that ended up being a nice opportunity to rethink the way that I was teaching Islamic art. And I came up with the model derived, I should say, stolen directly from the BBC series, History of the World in 100 Objects. I decided to do History of the Middle East in 100 Objects. And I did History of the Medieval in the fall, and then History of the, from the early modern to the contemporary period in the spring. So it's kind of a year-long survey class. And what happened when I shifted from the idea of, an Islamic art survey to a history of objects surprised even myself, because I ended up, bringing in a whole host of things, oftentimes very mundane, everyday types of objects. So for example, when I talk about Nasserism in the modern section of the class, I bring in the transistor radio as an object of kind of that it enables us to think about, the voice of Nasser and the way that it went out to the people and the way that he was able to bring people into, his political sphere. And so thinking about the history of objects as opposed to the history of art And I'm an archaeologist, so I had sort of always thought of myself as not being someone who was stuck in elite paradigms about what art was. But it enabled me to step outside of the canon in ways that are really actually liberating. And I think that students have really connected to in a way that surprised me as well. So it's enabled me to bring in a whole host of ordinary, mundane, everyday types of objects that had previously, somehow not been within my way of thinking about kind of the canon of Islamic art. It enabled me to step outside of the prism of the canon, or the prison maybe of the canon in some way, and incorporate a whole host of new types of objects that speak of or elicit that history. And that's, I think, part of a broader trend within the humanities, moving toward more object-based ontologies and different ways of working with objects as, and material culture as expressive of history. So a little history from below type model also influences that. This has I think there are ways we could also talk about this also as having certain types of accessibility and DEI implications as well for students.
Yeah, so all three of you have touched on some broader issues here in terms of like expanding the field, expanding the canon, anti-racism, DEI initiatives, decolonial studies, connection with post-colonial and decolonial studies. I'll ask you now, we can now kind of get more into the specifics. I want to ask each of you, how have the projects, some projects that each of you were involved with, how are they been incorporated into classroom instruction? How are these projects connecting with these larger issues that we've already been talking about a little bit? And what's on the horizon for these different initiatives? And feel free to jump in for anyone who wants to get started.
Would you like me to chime in?
Sure, go ahead.
Or I don't know if you want to put the third slide up on the screen here. Yeah. I loved what Stephennie had to say there about teaching through objects rather than through the stemma of the canon, because in a way, and you mentioned, Emily, sort of decoloniality, just borrowing from Mignolo here. When we think about sort of stretching beyond, received paradigms, it's a form of disenclosure. And that's really what we want to be aiming for. We don't want to enclose the materials in any sort of given paradigm or format or cluster or voice or even language. I think that is really diversity writ large. And so I've learned many things, of course, with GAHC. A number of you are contributors. And this is really one of those wiki models. We all sort of banded together and decided to help each other out when COVID broke out, and we created GAHC, the strong, seasonal winds. GAHC, we decided to ride the wind of change into this e-pivot. And I've discovered some really interesting things about how to use multimedia materials, both online and inside the classroom, because instead of being mutually exclusive, they're incredibly co-constituent. What I mean by that is, let's first, you guys have seen the public vision of that, and I'll be extremely curious to hear from the pedagogues here how they use some of the materials. But I can say that in our classrooms, whether they're online or in person, we use these multimedia presentations and also the glossary term definitions, which are nice, short, bite-sized pieces. One thing you can do with those materials is have them inside the classroom as a group exercise. Pedagogues are very quick, specialists of education are quick to say that you need to break up your teaching into 15-minute chunks. So just like Emily organized our conversation today, we've got 3 chunks of 15 minutes with some, front matter and back matter, essentially, right? But that's exactly what pedagogues are saying in terms of attention spans. So the presentations are all under 15 minutes, and the goal there is to get an attention chunk. And if you show one of the videos inside the classroom, you can actually ask students to respond to it or do a visual analysis by typing in chat. And I've noticed that many students who otherwise aren't keen to speak up are quite active in chat. So it's a really interesting empowerment. And then the visual analysis, sort of the iconographical analysis, if we borrow Panofsky, the method happens in the chat. And then when you pull it all together and then you do an interpretation together, you've got a mass-led iconological analysis. So you can then explain to the students by modeling this method that they're actually involved in a process of iconographical and iconological analysis. And then we try to craft arguments together. So you actually go through that whole process. If you don't have time, you can assign any of these as an assignment. I'll be curious to hear, what kind of rubrics or learning exercises or outcomes that might emerge from those out of classroom homework exercises. And then you can just flag it as an optional tool. And a number of students actually do that as an optional way of fleshing out certain questions. What I love about this model is that the classroom is no longer mine. I have to give up the sage on the stage and claims to monovocal authority. I personally love hearing the voice of my colleagues beaming into my classroom and watching their own ways of speaking about art. And it's extremely important, I think, for the students to see that knowledge is co-created and it can be distributed. And I think that's also key to DEI and decoloniality. You're disenclosing the authoritative voice. So I like the plurivocal and the plurilocal quality of those kinds of interventions in the classroom. And I also think it allows us through practice to push back on certain arguments that I'm seeing articulated nowadays, including in the recently published book by James Elkins entitled The End of Diversity in Art Historical Writing. He's basically saying that at the same time as we have all these calls for diversity, the language and the structures and the theories that we're using in North Atlantic art historical scholarship are spreading worldwide, and we're all more or less producing in the same way. And I like all of the little things that make the presentations different in Hamsin, and I don't want those differences to be elided or changed. And I think it's very important to allow those little patinas of difference to emerge and actually give that coloration to the field. So those are some of my thoughts.
Great, thank you. Well, I see lots of people are starting to ask questions in the chat, and that's great. We will be sure to get to them in just a few minutes. But before we do, I would just want to invite Stephennie and Fernando to talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives that they're involved with as well.
Would be happy.
Oh yes.
Go ahead, Fernando. Go ahead, please.
Go. You first.
Okay, well, I would be happy to talk about, there we go. We could talk about the one initiative that Emily actually has been involved in over the past couple of years, which is this the hashtag Students of Islamic Art Wikipedia Edithathon that was founded in the fall of 2018. When a group of Islamic art historians embarked on this project to try to collectively edit Wikipedia assignments related to Islamic art, architecture, topics related to the Islamic world. So I'll say a little bit about this project very briefly. It's, Wikipedia is often derided for its poorly researched, for having poorly researched content and its uneven quality. But the fact is now, after its 20 years of existence, Wikipedia is now the world's, is on the aggregate more accurate than the Encyclopedia Britannica. In the aggregate, of course, individual articles are indeed still very problematic, which is the purpose of this assignment. However you feel about Wikipedia, it is now the world's most frequently consulted source of information, and its ubiquity is really molding how people think about, our field as our discipline. So I feel like what really pushed me into this project or thinking about this project is just the idea that as academics, we can either ignore this reality or we can kind of jump in and try to engage it and shape it. So one thing that we confronted when we started this project in 2018 is the fact, and a kind of a real impetus for us and really related also to issues around diversity and inclusion and representation, is the fact that over 90% of Wikipedia's editors are men from Euro-American backgrounds. 84% of the entries are about Europe or North America. So Wikipedia remains still very strongly Eurocentric, and its coverage of the Middle East is pretty spotty and uneven, as anyone who works in the field will have known. So this project began as a kind of small effort to kind of address that problem. Emily, you can show the next slide. It's a project that's structured very carefully as a semester-long research project. So students have to begin researching at within the first few weeks of the semester. They're required to use about half of their sources have to be sourced from the university library. So it has also the virtue of bringing sources that are normally locked up inside, behind the walls of a university library out into the public sphere. And then the other half of the sources have to be quality online, easily accessible sources that are available on the internet. And they have to work on this slowly over the course of the semester as a group project. And ultimately they edit the article. I kind of help with their draft, improve their draft, make suggestions. And then we have one day where we do an international editathon at the end of the semester that typically includes between we've had as many as I think 4 different universities participating from Australia, from the UK, and across the United States. And we collaborate with the Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art and Design in Honolulu in Hawaii. And they serve as our social media backup and kind of help us catalog the results. Next slide, Emily. The whole project is supported for those in the United States, unfortunately not outside the United States yet, although they're working on this, by a dashboard where you can, where your students can be trained in how to edit Wikipedia. It's very simple to learn to edit Wikipedia, but it's helpful for them to learn a few basic editing skills. And then they also learn the kind of the dashboard walks them through a set of modules where they have to learn about plagiarism and critical approaches to different sources. So it really trains the students also in all those skills that you want them to learn when they're doing a kind of traditional research paper or research project. Next slide. And Wikipedia also has produced in the last couple of years a couple of handbooks that are useful for students. This one is one specific to art history that has been created in, I think, about 3 years ago. Those are available to download, or Wikipedia will mail you hard copies of these little flyers or pamphlets to hand out to your classroom and your students. Next slide. So the impact of this took even me by surprise. So obviously one clear impact is going to be that particular articles are going to have improved quality and improved sources. This is the sources for this semester. I decided to edit something that's very dear to my heart, which is the article on the mausoleum of Imam Shafi'i in Cairo. My first article was about this, so it was a little bit of a self-serving project, but I happened to notice that the article was really bad. So I had them go in and rewrite and improve the article. And you can see here the results in terms of the references and the improvement of in that realm. You can see here that, as I said earlier, they end up developing their traditional research skills, but also they learn a whole host of digital literacy skills, and they learn to look critically at what they find on the internet and to look for those references and those sources in the information that they're trying to uncover. Next slide. We also see really powerful responses from students in this project. At the end, I have them write a short reflection. It's completely, they can write whatever they would like to write. And I'm always touched by the number of students who say things like, that speak about both the way that the assignment opened their eyes to the power of the humanities, and especially public-facing humanities, and changing people's impressions and knowledge about the Middle East or the Islamic world, but also the kind of personal empowerment that students feel. They often begin the semester very nervous about this assignment, and by the end, they're Wikipedia editors, and they realize that they have a role to play in actually improving the public's knowledge on the internet. And they often speak also about things that are related to representation, equity, inclusion, especially for my Muslim students. This ends up being a very important exercise for them in that regard. Next slide. Oh, one more back. The impact is quite extraordinary. You can see here that this is just from last fall. The project ended up in my class alone adding over 1,000 edits. 27, almost 30,000 words were added just by my students, and 145,000 article views already for the articles that they edited. And that will just continue to grow, of course, over time. And last slide. These are our total stats at the end of the project. This, I think, was from on the left, I think, are the results from 2020, and on the right are the 2020 results for the overall project for hashtag Students of Islamic Art. We tweet about it. There are videos of students speaking and all kinds of other stuff. If you'd like to follow up a little bit more on Twitter with using that hashtag, you can follow along on that. Anyway, so this is just a quick dipping your toe into this project. We'd love to have people join us and to grow this project. I mean, the more people that are involved in it, the better it is, and would love to make it more global than it currently is, and have it be something that can really improve people's knowledge about Islamic art on Wikipedia.
Thank you so much. And I will also just jump in quickly to say that, you know, as someone who's taught this project multiple times in my classroom, I found it to be a really great project, no matter, even if you do it for the whole semester or just do it for a single assignment within your class. I think it's something that the students really enjoy. And I'm also very interested in how can we expand this beyond the United States, and also how can we expand this beyond the English speaking classroom. So, and I'm also, just like Stephennie, I'm also happy to talk with anybody about this project and how you might be able to implement it in your own teaching. I'd like to shift over to Fernando to ask about his involvement with GAHC, the Global Architectural History Teaching Collaborative. And I'll also say, I'm monitoring the chat, and there actually have been several questions about access to syllabi and sharing syllabi. And I think that's something that GAHC is very interested in doing. So if you could talk about that, that would be great.
Yes, yes. I am involved in the GAHC, Global Architectural History Teaching Collaborative. We are more than 300 professors from all over the world. And in our website, we have more than 300 lectures about specific topics on our architectural history from a global view. This network was started by Mark Yartzabek, MIT, and Vikram Prakash from the University of Washington, and it's a very useful source for everywhere. We can find it in our website www.gahtc.org. We can find there more than 300. I don't remember the number now, but several of them about Islamic architecture or about topics related to Islamic architecture. And it's available online. You can download the lectures, and each lecture is have the slides and notes for the teacher to prepare to teach this to their students. And from the GAHTC, we started with Ana Maria Leon from Michigan, a particular group about Latin American architectural history. It's from north is el sur, north is the south, and we have our own group of lectures in the GAHTC website. Some of them, my lectures, are about the relationship between Islamic architecture and Latin America, obviously.
Could you, go ahead, sorry.
Yes, no. I think this is the group you can see, this is the Latin American group that is part of the GAHTC. I see here now in this meeting, Silvia Rojo and Silvia Cornecchi, both are part of this group.
And so you were saying, so syllabi are also included. Do you have the website here, by the way?
No, it's not the website, right? Wrote it there. Is the website of GAHTC is GAHTC, Global Architectural History Teaching Collaborative. And all the lectures are free to download. Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, just so everyone has it. Perfect. Thank you.
More than 300 lectures, and all of them from a global perspective. Not all of them including talk about Islamic architecture, but several of them. We have three modules about Islamic architecture, and several lectures in other modules about Islamic features, some particular Islamic features in other continents.
And the website does have syllabi, right? That you can access. Yes. and download, right? For several different kinds of topics and courses.
Yes, our idea is you can construct your syllabus. Connecting different parts of each lecture. The entire course is not. Sorry.
Don't worry about it.
Yes. The entire course is not probably it will be not useful. You have 14 lectures about Southeast Asian architecture, but maybe you can extract 1 or 2 or 3 topics about this to construct your own syllabus. This is what I do. This is what I do. I took parts from several of these modules to construct the syllabus of our courses. Yes, this is the idea.
Great. And I have to say that I've really enjoyed using the website myself in my own teaching, and I use it in I use it in a very similar way, that just to kind of fill in the gaps of my own teaching within a course, maybe, not the entire course, or not even a whole part of the course, but maybe one lecture here, or even a portion of a lecture, just to kind of, and also it's just great to browse through the website and to kind of, especially as at the beginning of the semester when you're really trying to get some ideas, especially some fresh ideas about how to what you can add or take away from your material, to find I don't know, a lecture on coffee in the early modern period in Safavid Iran, which is definitely something I've used, and I've made good use of our South Asia, like you were talking about. Or a lecture about Islamic architecture in South America, right? Which is also, I believe, available.
You have 4 lectures about Islamic architecture in South America.
I think they're quite popular, yeah? Yeah.
Maybe this is remember one question someone posed in the chat about the definition of Islamic architecture and the difference between Islamic and Muslim architecture. I know this is a very difficult topic. In my position, Islamic architecture, Islamic is a cultural norm. It's not related specifically to Muslim architecture. In our part of the world, is necessary to understand the topic in that way. Not only in Latin America. In Spain, we have synagogues, and we have ideas and elements and spaces from Islamic architecture. So but they are Christian, or the other one, or the other Jewish. And in Latin America, we have only a few Muslim population, and all this architecture is made for Christians and by Christians generally, and but using forms, using shapes, using ideas of Islamic architecture. In my position, it's a cultural norm, not related to a religious. When we can talk about Muslim architecture by Muslims, we use Muslim architecture. When we use Islamic architecture, we are thinking in a topic not related specifically about religion.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And actually, you've effortlessly given us a transition to inviting some more questions from our audience. And yes, indeed, in the chat, I've noticed that there are questions that it's either that range between the very nitty-gritty specifics of teaching, right, about textbooks and the practicalities of textbooks and syllabi, and then there's also the sort of really big picture question, the $1 million question that we could spend another 2 hours at least talking about, which is how do you define Islamic art and architecture, or the art and architecture of the Islamic world, to students, right? So yeah, Fernando, you were pointing us to that larger, big picture question, and I'd love to hear Christiane and Stephennie's comments on this as well. I'll get started and say that in my own teaching that and I'm just kind of actually just picking up on something that Christiane said in terms of really trying not to give a firm definition, not to enclose the field. I usually start off in my classes, we have to start somewhere with a proposed definition of any art and architecture that was produced in the lands of under Muslim rule, essentially. And I start with that definition in my class, and then I actively invite my students with me all semester long to basically test that definition and to see to what extent that holds up, and to what extent does that definition work, to what extent does it not entirely satisfy kind of the material that I really want to emphasize to my students. I try to emphasize to my students that these kinds of definitions are it's better to start off with a definition to constantly be questioning it and to be putting pressure on it. So we look at like I begin my class starting with Coptic church in Cairo with the iconostasis that has wood and mother of pearl inlay from the 14th century. And then I show a minbar also from Cairo that was made about the exact same time, and it looks virtually the same. So we start talking about that. What does that mean? And are these both examples of Islamic art, and why or why not? So I would like to invite Stephennie and Christiane, maybe if you two want to comment a little bit more about that. In the meantime, I'll be checking the chat.
Steffi, do you want to go first this time? You're muted.
It's the perpetual refrain of the Zoom era, isn't it? You're muted. I guess I would say that, well, everything that you said, Emily, is essentially how I approach it as well. This is our perennial conversation that will probably never end in our field, but again, like you have to begin with something, right? And so framing it deliberately at the beginning of the semester as a historiographical construct and thinking about why it was constructed that way and who it serves over the course of the semester, of course, is really, I think, the best way to deal with that. Like you, Emily, I take the same approach where whereby the definition is, parts of the world that came under the rule of political power of Muslims or the sovereignty of Muslim rulers. But that always, in the first lecture, this is kind of, very pointedly a conversation that I elicit, always containing large communities of Christians, of Jews, of Hindus, of a variety of other different religious and ethnic and racial groups as well. So the idea of having this very kind of inclusive, expansive definition of the Islamic world is kind of built into the way that I begin that conversation. And then like you, Emily, I bring in the work of, we talk about synagogues in Cairo and other places in Iran and elsewhere. We talk about churches. We talk about, those are objects in my objects class. These works of architecture then come to really tell that story of their own accord. Christy.
I have exactly the same approach. So I'll sound redundant if I just repeat, what Emily and Stephennie said. You start with a premise. Some of it may hold, some of it might not, and then you just bombard it with questions, and then you see what comes out of it as a productive, nexus of contestation, historiographically speaking. So I also bring in all sorts of other objects. On Khamsin, we've got a video on Yazidi amulets. We would maybe posit Yazidism as contra Islamic, the antithesis of it. But when you look at the culture, especially, amuletic culture, it's very similar in some ways. And so I like to take things that we tend to place on a spectrum of binaries and really muddy the waters a little bit, so that we don't accidentally reassert these false dichotomies within the classroom. So I try to find that tertiary space, which is a space of interstices and connections and constellations and so on. And then we can try to come out of the classroom with something else. Emily, if you want to go to my final slide, I loved Stephennie's statistics for Wikipedia. It's amazing the impact that just her classroom exercises are having, and of course for Emily and others who are doing the marathon there. I can tell you that for Khamsin, we also have been interested in our statistics, and also not just the numbers, but the footprint on the map. So we've had in about a year, a little bit more than a year and a half, about 100,000 views. That is definitely not just in the classrooms of our colleagues, evidently. So it's laid bare the fact that there's a thirst for scholarly information about the Islamic world. And so it's important and maybe incumbent upon us, it might be a social imperative that we actually translate our work into a public form of knowledge, because there are many individuals out there who want access to sturdy scholarship about Islam and the Islamic world and Islamic art. And they're stretching all over the globe, all the way to Australia, of course, Latin America, the integrated America, south of the Sahara. Our big clusters are Europe and the Middle East, and of course, North America. And hopefully that can expand, further. We've had folks beaming in from Kazakhstan and from Alaska and some other places. So that's been revealing to me. And in terms of scholarly resources, I was struck by what Stephennie was showing in terms of the critical apparatus that now she and her students are putting into the entries. I love long bibliographies, these are great. And we're doing the same with our presentations. And what I love about those bibliographies is that they're often hyperlinked. And so what we're doing is producing a shortcut for proper research and synthetic research to as many online sources that we consider reliable. So I think that's also a pooling resource as well. And then finally, in terms of scholarship writ large, I mean, there's not just the classroom and then the public, because here I think many of us are crossing those and they're reinforcing one another in interesting ways. The way we're actually practicing our craft has bigger implications for the humanities at large. And in this case, I'm thinking sort of the new sort of trend of the transhumanities, right? So what are the transhumanities? You've got the public humanities, you've got the digital humanities, so technology and the traditional field of the humanities creating a new interdiscipline of sorts, right? You've got ecological humanities, medical humanities, but here in this case, we've got public and digital humanities. And I think it's important to create structures through which scholars might want to also have tentacles into the public domain, especially at the junior level, because that's becoming more and more a criterion for tenure and promotion cases. And it's also catering to the public good. So those are some of my thoughts on that.
Great, and you know, I'll also just comment that, or I'll recognize and acknowledge, because you pointed out just how many people from all over the world are beaming in and checking out the content of GAHC, that we also have the incredible geographic diversity of the people who are tuning into this session, right? You know, we've got people, you know, saying hello from a really impressive from all different parts of the world. So I also just want to acknowledge that as well. We are now at time. We're now at 1 o'clock, so I understand if everyone has to go. But I thought, you know, maybe now we've talked a little bit about that $1,000,000 question of, you know, how do you define the field, the range of Islamic art in architecture, or the architecture of the Islamic world in the classroom. Maybe we can wrap up and talk a little bit more about this question about textbooks and whether or not you even use a textbook or not, because I actually think that's a really important and interesting question. And it actually directly relates, of course, to how do you define, it says something about how you do approach some kind of definition or representation of what this material, what this field even is.
The textbook.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, like in pre-GAHC days, I remember you and I, Christy, we were like, we should really write a textbook together. And that dream, I think, has evaporated into all kinds of other projects. But yeah, the textbooks are a challenge. I do use a textbook, but it's really like I would say like a third. It's like a secondary or third source of information in my classes. So I have kind of a simple basic textbook reading that I give them, and then I supplement it with a ton of other stuff. So a lot of other, there's so many online resources. GAHC is one of them, but also by now there are also some very high quality videos and films and, you know, other types of more interactive content online as well. And then typically I will have a discussion section in all of my classes structured around an academic article written by one of my illustrious colleagues, typically, that I have students summarize in a brief summary, kind of analytical summary that's structured in a very kind of specific way where they have to find the thesis and the supporting evidence. And that helps them to work their way through a more challenging academic article and initiates them into learning how to read critically. So I would say that I haven't entirely abandoned the textbook. I think it does provide a really kind of basic grounding of information for them, but I really supplement very heavily with a lot of other additional resources in all of my classes.
Fernando, Christy, what,
Yes.
how do you approach this? Yes, thank you.
We focus on the Western Islamic architecture because it's the most related to us, and about Islamic architecture in Spain and Morocco, we have a lot of textbooks in Spanish. But about Islamic architecture in Latin America, we have to construct our own textbooks. It's a new field in construction now. But about other points of the Islamic world, we have a very small part of textbooks in Spanish. So for this, it's very useful, the possibility of GAHC is not.
Oh, you're cutting out just a bit. I think we've lost him. Fernando? Hello? I think we might have, oh, yeah, I think he's actually dropped out. We'll wait for him to reconnect, but Christiane, did you have anything to say on this?
Sure, I'll just come clean and say I disbanded the textbook about a decade ago, maybe even more.
Yeah.
I got so many complaints from the undergrads. I think Fernando's back on, so let me see.
Oh, okay.
Hand it back to him.
Yeah, Fernando, are you back with us? This is Zoom life.
I see him, but is he frozen?
I think so.
Huh. If you want, I can say just a few more words as we try to figure.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'll be a space filler.
Okay. Yes. Never a space filler. Yeah, but yeah, thank you.
So I disbanded the textbook a while ago, and the textbook, just like an exhibition, will freeze content in structure. Just like when you have an exhibition, you have to put an object in a vitrine, and then that will tell a tale through comparison, through framing devices. And it's the same with the textbook. You're actually freezing content in chapters. And I really wrestled with this for a really long time, and I don't like that rigidity. I think we do need a basic lingua franca, and we can convey that in the classroom and point students to some textbooks that are out there and let them decide, pick and choose what they might want to refer to. But I really like more and more the living survey that you guys will find on Khamsin, where we just kind of cluster things through a chronological spine, but then everything points to each other so that you can have endless clusters and constellations, because everybody teaches differently and our materials are being used in many different classrooms that are not Islamic art history classrooms. So we have to be careful to not enclave them in certain structures. And so the idea of writing a textbook, Stephennie and I and our youthful energy.
Yeah, I imagine that. I admire your enthusiasm.
No,
I haven't even been able to get my Khamsin video to you, Christy. So like, I don't know if I'm going to write any textbook anytime soon.
No, I have no textbook dreams at this point. I don't like the rigidity of the printed structure of the chapter, because that will actually disallow other narratives and other pedagogical exercises to emerge. So I like sort of the elbowing out of it personally.
Yeah, thank you. Fernando, I think you're back with us. Hello?
Sorry, my internet connection is not so good.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it's fine. Do you
have
mind?
Finished when I have finished it when my internet connection fell.
Okay.
The idea is we have a lot of text in Spanish about Spain and Morocco, less about other regions, but and about Latin America it's a field on construction.
Yeah. So would you say that it's definitely something that you would want to have more text in Spanish on different parts of the Islamic world? Is that something that you think would be useful in your teaching?
Yes, I think it will be very useful, and I started working on this. I translated into Spanish several GAHC lectures. So in our website, you can find the original lectures in English, but some of them translated into Spanish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that also came up. This is a big problem. Also, actually, I think it's been touched upon for both GAHC and Wikipedia and Khamsin, this issue of languages, right? The sort of, the real need for a greater degree of translations, and also, just kind of an expansion of, materials in all different kinds of languages for, to be used in the classroom, but also to reflect the amazing diversity of that, you know, the Islamic world covers, right? So I think that's definitely a theme that's emerged across all of these different case studies, and needs to continue to be addressed.
If I can just say one quick other thing about textbooks.
Sure.
I think it really oftentimes it matters less what course materials you assign than what actually happens in the classroom around those course materials, right? So I haven't fully abandoned the textbook because I think it gives, and I use Hillenbrand, I think, for my medieval, and I actually use a very old textbook, Barbara Brand, for the kind of some of the Ottoman, Safavid, Mughal stuff, but doesn't work for the entire semester in my modern 100 objects. And that's a very old textbook at this point. But I just find that for them having like this little like nugget of basic data, right, to begin with is helpful. And then we take that all apart oftentimes in the lectures, in the classroom, we challenge it, the other readings that we have come in and then, you know, undo things that are in the textbook or build out beyond what's in the textbook. So I think it's not so much like you have to have the textbook or not, but it's really how you think with the course materials that you've given the students that really makes the difference.
Yeah. Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge in the chat that Mira has just posted about, in terms of translation, a new journal, the Art and Translation, that is also a great resource. Since 2009. I mean, you know, we're historians, so for me, recent is, you know, after 1900. So anyway, thank you, Mira, for that. So I do want to keep the time. I want to respect everyone's time. I know that you know, in Zoom land, it is difficult to you know, keep your focus, hold your attention for a long time. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you to our panelists for this excellent discussion. And keep in touch with the IJIA, with the International Journal of Islamic Architecture, where the you know, proceedings of this discussion will appear later on, probably in about a year or so. And in the meantime, you can check us out. I posted the website of the journal, and we're always looking for new contributions from all parts of the world, from all different disciplines. So you know, so we're always happy to hear from you about that. And yeah, so please just keep in touch. Thank you all. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, just take care of yourselves.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for hosting and moderating.
And lovely to see everyone here. Thanks to our audience for all the great questions. Happy to answer them directly.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
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 Bye.